Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 3878, and I urge its passage. Since the terrorist attacks of 9/11, the U.S. Congress has appropriated $2.4 billion in port security funds, grant funds, to protect port facilities against potential terror attacks. And as a nation, we have done a fairly good job of updating the physical security at ports, but the U.S. government has been very slow to ensure that our ports are secure from cyber vulnerabilities. For example, cybersecurity of our nation's critical infrastructure has been on the Government Accountability Office's high-risk list since 2003, and yet we have not fully engaged on cybersecurity efforts at the nation's 360 seaports. The threat of a cyber attack is real, and when addressing the protection of maritime critical infrastructure, we must clearly define the roles and responsibilities for ensuring our nation's ports are protected. Under the Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002, the Coast Guard is identified as the government agency responsible for ensuring the physical security at our nation's ports infrastructure. This bill makes it clear that the Coast Guard is also the primary agency responsible for ensuring the maritime sector is prepared to prevent and to respond to cybersecurity risks and vulnerabilities. More than $1 trillion of goods, from cars to oil to corn and everything in between, move through our nation's seaports each and every year. Like many industries in America, port facilities and ship operators are increasingly moving cargo through our ports using automated industrial control systems. And while this automation certainly has a lot of benefits, such as reducing the time that it takes to stock our shelves and lowering the cost of doing business, it doesn't come without risks. These computer systems are controlling machinery at port facilities to move containers and fill tanks and unload and offload ships. Terror groups, nation-states, criminal organizations, hackers, and even disgruntled employees could breach into these systems with potentially catastrophic results to the nation's security and economy. Breaches in the maritime domain are particularly concerning, not only from an economic standpoint, but because the dangerous cargo, such as liquefied natural gas and other dangerous cargoes that also pass through our nation's seaport, are at risk. Just as we have hardened physical security at our nation's port, we need to do the same in the virtual space to protect the systems critical to the maritime transportation system against malicious actors. This bill does just that, and it requires the Coast Guard to develop a comprehensive cyber risk assessment specific to the vulnerabilities of the maritime industry, and it directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to encourage participation with information sharing to better streamline coordination at the national level. H.R. 3878 is a bipartisan piece of legislation introduced by my colleague, Ms. Torres, and I give her great credit for this piece of legislation and working with so many members on this. And it actually is a result of a hearing held by the Homeland Security Subcommittee that I chaired back in October on the subject of cybersecurity at our nation's port. The bill clarifies the Department of Homeland Security's role in maritime cybersecurity. As well, it ensures that port facilities work with the Coast Guard to identify cyber risks and vulnerabilities and share best practices across the industry. This is the first step, Mr. Speaker, in protecting our ports from cyber threats. I certainly urge my colleagues to support this common sense, bipartisan legislation. Again, I want to thank the gentlelady from California for her work on this issue. I reserve the balance of my time.